Hello and welcome to the Dungeon. I'm your host Rob. Today we're going to be looking at another multi-class involving the Life Domain Cleric. And don't worry, this is 3 Life Domain Cleric videos in a row. I know we're going to be kind of done with Life Domain for a while after this. But while I was on the subject, I just really wanted to kind of finish it off. You know what I mean? So we're going to be looking at adding the Circle of Shepherd Druid to a Life Domain Cleric. And sorry, my chair squeaks like crazy lately. Anyways. In general, I kind of break my druids into 2 categories. I've got my wild shapers and I've got my spellcasters. And of the spellcasters, I really like the Circle of Shepherds. It's my favorite of the casting predominantly type druids, right? And the reason is because I really like the summoning playstyle. And I think that it's just a much more interesting way to play a character in a lot of cases than just playing like a heal bot or, you know, a straight up damage dealer. And not that dealing damage isn't fun too. It's a lot of fun. Just rolling a ton of dice, doing a truckload of damage. But I find that damage doesn't scale at the same rates that monster hit points do. Whereas your summoning spells are usually pretty good and pretty effective. And the Circle of Shepherd, just getting a bunch of bonuses to those summons, making them even more effective, is quite good. And if you've ever played like a heal bot type of character, I personally just don't really find that really super enjoyable. I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm not saying that other people won't like it. Anything along those lines. I'm not even saying it's not effective. I'm just saying that I personally don't really like it. But one of the big draws of the Druid is the versatility of the class. You can heal. You can shapeshift. You've got some nice summons. You've got some good damage spells. You've got exploration spells. You've got things like Pass Without Trace. Like, you have a lot going for you as a Druid. And with only a couple levels of Life Domain, even 1 really, I could take a spell like Good Berries or Healing Spirits and make them so much more effective than they normally are. And that doesn't mean I want to play a dedicated healer. But if I'm going to take Good Berries anyway, which I was going to anyhow, probably on a Druid, I might as well make it like 4 times better than it already was. And it was already a pretty good spell. So that's kind of my thought process here. Also, the Circle of Shepherds specifically has their totems that become available at level 2, and one of those is your Unicorn Totem, which turns you can single target a heal, and then all other allies that you choose within that radius can get hit points from that heal as well. Technically, they get hit points based on your Druid level, not on the heal itself, but that's okay. Just the fact that you could turn like a healing word, for example, into like an AoE heal that's restoring hit points to a bunch of allies at once is excellent. And then if you add the Circle of Life, the Life Domain Cleric on top of that, with the bonus healing that they get, it means that your 1 healing spell suddenly has so much more impact and effect than it otherwise would have had. And you're just getting so much more value out of that spell slot. The other big draw of the Life Domain, of course, is the domain spells. The fact that you can have Bless, Cure Wounds, and if you go to level 3, Lesser Restoration and Spiritual Weapon as always prepared spells. These are great spells that I was probably going to be preparing on a Cleric anyways, or even on a Druid if they're available. And now I don't have to worry about it, and that just lets me dig deeper and get some of those really good spells that a lot of times you just can't fit in because you're like, well, I kind of need a heal, or I kind of need this. And there's always other spells that I would like to take, and I just can't really justify it in a lot of cases. But because some of my basics are already covered, it means that I can just pick a couple other spells instead, and those ones can go from being like, bench players to starting lineup type of thing, And I like that idea a lot. Unfortunately, the other big draw of the Life Domain Cleric is that I get heavy armor. And as a Druid, you cannot wear metal armor or use metal shields. And so that's kind of a big negative. When you look at my last video of the Divine Soul Sorcerer combined with the Life Domain Cleric, that was really one of the big draws, is that you are taking a character that's usually very fragile and very squishy with a Sorcerer, and suddenly that character can wear full plate mail and use a shield, and then on top of that, you've got access to spells like Shield, and boost your armor class even higher. You've got Mirror Image, you've got Blur. So you take a character that's usually very fragile, and suddenly now it's a very durable character. And then even, like things like Absorb Elements, it's just another amazing spell available to sorcerers. And so you have a character that suddenly becomes much, much more tanky than it was ever meant to be, really. And it's a very small investment. It was just like one level of Life Domain Cleric, and you can do all that. Unfortunately, that's not going to apply to the Druid, really. I mean, maybe you're in a campaign world where your Dungeon Master lets you find like some sort of like bone armor or insect carapace armor that counts as plate mail kind of thing, or half plate, something along those lines. But in general, that's not going to be available, and most characters won't be able to use that. So unfortunately, the heavy armor is not very useful on this character, which is a loss, but it's not the end of the world either. I also want to point out that even though we're going to be looking at a mostly Druid, just adding a few levels of Cleric, I actually think this works really well the other way around too. You can be playing a Life Domain Cleric, just add a few levels of, like, say, Circle of Shepherd Druid, and this is going to give you the ability to add things like Goodberry to your spell list, Healing Spirits, to take your totem and have like an AoE buff that you can use. And it's also going to mean that because you're a Life Domain Cleric and you get like that bonus to all your weapon damage as you level up, you can be using spells like Shillelagh as your weapon. And I think that's a really strong fit. It's not the purpose of this video, but I wanted to say that one of the big draws is the flexibility, that you can play this either way. And I think it works best when you go mostly one way or the other, but it works well either mostly to either side, right? Mostly Cleric or mostly Druid, I think are both very, very viable. So with our 1 to 3 levels of Life Domain Cleric, aside from the spell list, we already mentioned that, and the heavy armor, we're getting our Disciple of Life. So whenever we cast a spell at first or higher level to restore hit points to a creature, the creature regains additional hit points equal to 2 plus the spell's level. So if we're using like a good berry, for example, usually good berries will give us 10 berries and each one restores 1 hit point. Now that's not bad. It's actually pretty versatile, and frankly, if you got an ally and he's like unconscious and bleeding out on the ground making death saving throws, you just gotta bring him above 0 again and get him back in the fight. And so healing 1 hit point with a good berry is pretty good. But what if you could heal 4 hit points with that 1 good berry for a first level spell slot? And don't forget, you have 10 good berries. So, I mean, that's like basically creating a bunch of weaker healing potions, but you can divide them up amongst your allies. They can use them when they need them. It's great for in-combat heals. It's great for out-of-combat heals. And the fact that you're able to take that one spell and just like amplify its effectiveness so much and get so much more value out of it is really what I'm looking at here. And like I said, that doesn't mean you're suddenly going to become like a straight up heal bot or anything else like that. But it's a spell I was probably going to take on the Druid anyways. And now it's just so much more effective than it would have been without it. Now, if I want the channel divinity at level 2, might as well mention that. It's going to give you a pool of hit points equal to 5 times your cleric level, which obviously isn't going to be a lot of hit points in our case, but that's okay. Choose any creatures within 30 feet of you and divide those hit points among them. This takes an action to use, of course. The feature can restore a creature to no more than half its hit point maximum, and you can't use it on an undead or construct. Now, the nice thing about this is that if you have a bunch of party members who all go down at once, say you get hit with like an AoE attack, like a fireball or a dragon breath at higher levels or whatever, you have 2 or 3 people who all go down at once. With that one action, you can get them all back above 0 and into the combat again. And like we just said with Goodberry, sometimes getting them above 0 is really all you need. Especially if you have, like, say, like a paladin or someone like that in your party, right? And that paladin could lay hands themselves. But they can't do that when they're unconscious, making death saving throws, bleeding all over the place, you know? You just got to get them back up in the fight, and then they can heal themselves from there. You know, he'll be fine. It's just a flesh wound, right? So I like that one a lot. The only reason I'd go to level 2, though, is if I was planning on going to 3 and getting Lesser Restoration and Spiritual Weapon added to my repertoire. And to me, those are both really good spells, so there's nothing wrong with doing that. But really, I'm looking at 1 to 3 levels of Life Cleric, and that's all I'm going to be taking. Now, if we look at the Circle of Shepherd Druid, what are we getting from there? The main thing is, at level 2, we're getting our Spirit Totem. So, we're going to have 3 different choices for what totem we want to use. But this is how it works. As a bonus action, you can magically summon an incorporeal spirit to a point you can see within 60 feet of you. The spirit creates an aura in a 30-foot radius around that point. It counts as neither a creature nor an object, which is nice, so it can't be killed. Though it does have the spectral appearance of the creature it represents. As a bonus action, you can move the spirit up to 60 feet to a point you can see, which is also nice because if the combat migrates, you can take the spirit with you. It lasts 1 minute or until you're incapacitated, and you can only use it once per short or long rest. But that's fine because once per short rest is actually really powerful for this ability. So, like I said, you're going to have 3 options: your bear, your hawk, and your unicorn. In general, I'm going to go with the bear or the unicorn. Unicorn, I think, is usually not as good as bear, but because we've got the Life Domain Cleric ability, I think unicorn becomes extremely, extremely powerful. And it was already pretty powerful. Hawk is the one we use least, but when we talk about it, I will give some specific examples of when you might want to use it. So basically, here's what you get with your bonus action. The bear is going to give you and your allies might and endurance. Each creature of your choice within the aura, and don't forget it's a 30-foot aura, that's a big aura, right? It's going to get temporary hit points equal to 5 plus your druid level. So let's say in our example that you're a level 7 druid, we'll say, and 1 level of Life Domain Cleric at this point, right? So all those allies of yours are going to get 7 temporary hit points, plus the 5 they get automatically, right? 5 plus your druid level. So 12 temporary hit points is pretty good. In addition, they also gain advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws within the aura. My main use of this is if I'm conjuring a bunch of creatures. So let's say I cast like a conjure woodland beings, for example, right? The creatures are pretty weak and fragile. They don't have a lot of hit points. But in our example of a 1st level Life Cleric, 7th level Druid, they're all going to gain 12 temporary hit points. And on a creature that might not have even had 12 hit points to start with, this is really just, again, amplifying and magnifying what we already had and just making it way more effective. So, the Hawk Spirit. When a creature makes an attack roll against a target in the Spirit's aura, you can use your reaction to grant advantage to that attack roll. In addition, you and your allies have advantage on wisdom perception checks while in the aura. Now, like I said, in general, this one's not as good. It takes my reaction to give somebody else advantage on their attack. But there are some times when I might want to use it. Maybe I've got a rogue in the party, and due to whatever the circumstances are, he's not able to attack with sneak attack, right? Maybe he doesn't have an ally in range, or maybe he just doesn't have advantage on the attack or whatever. By giving him advantage, I can make it an automatic qualification for his sneak attack, and now he's going to be able to get in all that extra damage. And that's a pretty good use for it as well, but it's a lot more specific, and it's more rare that it's going to come up. And the advantage on the perception checks might sound nice, but unfortunately the unicorn is going to do something similar, and it's just way better in my opinion. So the unicorn spirit, you and your allies gain advantage on all ability checks made to detect creatures in the spirit's aura. Now that's a little more specific because it's only creatures, but kind of a bit of overlap there anyways. In addition, if you cast a spell using a spell slot that restores hit points to any creature inside or outside the aura, each creature of your choice in the aura also regains hit points equal to your druid level. So in that example, they're going to get 7 hit points when you heal somebody else. So let's say on the example of the paladin, you cast a healing word on the paladin. All other allies and the paladin, if they're in the aura as well, are going to gain those 7 temporary hit points. But you're also got 1 level of Life Cleric, which means they're also going to gain an additional 2 hit points plus the 1 per spell level on top of all that. Well, actually, it ends up being, so it ends up being an extra 3 hit points on top of what they're already gaining. So they're already getting 7 because of your ability from the Unicorn Spirit. So now it's going to be 10 hit points. Now, this again is really nice in combination with like healing multiple allies at once, or healing a bunch of spirit creatures that you've conjured or summoned, like beasts or fae or whatever they are. And, you know, if a bunch of them are wounded, you could heal a bunch of them all with that 1 spell. And I really like that ability a lot. So we're going to go through the next few abilities a lot faster, because they don't really benefit from your life domain multi-class the way that the other ones do. But they're worth mentioning, and they're good abilities. So whatever. Level 6, you get Master Summoner. Any beast or face summoned or created by a spell that you cast gains the following benefits. When they appear, they have more hit points than normal, and they get 2 extra hit points per hit die. And the damage from their attacks is considered magical for purposes of overcoming immunity or resistance to non-magical attacks and damage. So note, it's only beast or fey. If you use like a conjure elemental spell, not going to help them at all. But still pretty good, filling that role of summoning lots of creatures and just making them tougher and more durable. And this is going to stack with your either bonus healing, because they have more hit points, so they're going to be able to get healed more, or your temporary hit points, because the aura from your totem that could give temporary hit points. Which one was that again? Sorry, your bear spirit. Forgot already. I suck. But anyways, the bear spirit is going to give them temporary hit points, and then they're also going to have more actual hit points on top of that. So it's a pretty nice combination there. And of course, just having their attacks count as magical is excellent, because that's one of the problems you start running into, is that some of these lower level summon spells are great at low level, but at high level you fight things with a lot of resistances and immunities, and then they're not as useful. But in this case, it helps to overcome that a lot. Guardian Spirit. At 10th level, beast or fey that you call forth through magic get healed for a number of hit points equal to half your druid level every round. So again, if you have a bunch of summoned creatures and they're in that aura of your totem, maybe you gave them all temporary hit points, for example. At the end of every round, they're also getting healed for half your druid level, which at this point is going to be at least level 10, because that's when you get the ability. Now, that's not going to benefit from your Life Domain Cleric, though, because you're not using a spell to restore hit points to them. You're using an ability. That's why I say most of your gains are going to be the low level abilities. At level 14, you get Faithful Summons. This one isn't always the most practical because it requires you to be like unconscious to use it, but it's a cool ability nonetheless. So if you're reduced to 0 hit points or are incapacitated against your will, you can immediately gain the benefits of a conjure animal spell as if it was cast using a 9th level spell slot. It summons 4 beasts of your choice that are challenge rating 2 or lower. Note though that those are your choice. Usually the spell leaves the animal choice in the hands of the dungeon master. In this case, you get to choose the creatures, which is pretty nice. The conjured beasts appear within 20 feet of you. If they receive no commands from you, they protect you from harm and attack your foes. The spell lasts 1 hour, requires no concentration, and you can only use it once per long rest. So those are the main abilities of the class. And then of course you're also going to have your wild shaping and stuff like that. You're going to have access to all the other perks that druids have. And to me, druids are a pretty strong class to begin with. And just the fact that I'm going to be able to add this extra healing on top of a class that already has pretty good heals is really what I'm looking towards. The domain spells are also definitely a perk as well. Adding things like Bless to my spell list is pretty handy. Actually, druids might have had Bless. I can't be bothered to look it up right now, but either way, it's a nice find. And even if you do have it, now it's always prepared, so even better. But yeah, in general, I feel like it's a really, really strong multi-class, and it's one that doesn't require a big investment on cleric levels. Like I said, 1 level cleric, and you could have most of the main benefits, right? 3 levels to give you a spiritual weapon. Nothing wrong with that either. And then it's not harming your druid progression as much because you're still full caster. You could get all the way to 9th level druid spell still. If you took even 3 levels of cleric and your campaign going all the way to 20, you could have 9th level druid spells. So still pretty strong, right? And it just takes a class that's already got a lot of flexibility and a lot of different viable play styles, and just makes you kind of better at all of them. So I really think it's a strong mix. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about racial choices or feat choices. I kind of go over that a lot. But usually I find my choices are always the same. If I'm playing a caster and somebody's a melee a lot, I'm probably going to favor Warcaster. I like Lucky a lot. It's just really sound on everybody. Depending on what racial feats you might have, some of those become a lot more viable. Like let's say I played a Wood Elf. I think Wood Elf makes a lot of sense in this character choice. Then maybe I want the Wood Elf magic, right, from Xanatar. So I could look at something like that, right? I think that because we can't wear the heavy armor, that dumping strength suddenly becomes a lot more viable than on, say, the sorcerer, where we couldn't really do that as much, right? So playing things like halflings or whatnot are great choices as well. I know that Wizards is releasing, or maybe just released, their Rhyme of the Ice Maiden, and they have Furbolgs in there. And Furbolgs were already kind of available from Volos if your DM allowed it. But I think that that makes a very strong choice as well. I've never actually played a Furbolg, so I can't talk to it too much. But just looking at it, they look like they're a strong choice for Druid especially. So nothing wrong with that either. But if you're just limited to player's handbook choices, then, Wood Elf, Halfling, Hill Dwarf, of course, is another great choice. Variant Human, always strong. And, if I have an odd number on my Wisdom, I'm probably looking for something like Observant Feat. The Alert Feat's not bad if I'm planning on doing a lot of crowd control type stuff. So, like I said, though, it's pretty much always the same choices I always recommend. And that's a little unfortunate. It's just the way the game is, though. Not all feats are created equal, okay? Anyone who's ever looked at, like, Polearm Master and then looked at, like, some of the other feats, if you're playing like a melee guy, you quickly realize that things like Polearm Master and Sharpshooter and Great Weapon Master stand out a lot more than some of their competitors. It's just the way it is. But anyways, those are my main thoughts. Feel free to like, subscribe, and of course, as always, ring the bell. And as always, leave me your comments in the comment section. I promise to read every one of them. I may not respond, but I do promise to read all of them. And that's everything I have. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.